Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for a CIEEM webinar on the life and times of the consultant ecologist. This webinar will be presented by my lovely colleague Diana Clark from Carew Ecology Associates. Before I hand over to Diana, I just want to mention that we will be doing a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And the way to ask questions is by clicking on the Q&A icon, which should appear at the top of your screen, and then typing in your question and pressing send. Okay, so without further ado, I will now hand over to Diana. Thank you, Diana.
Thanks, Christy. We're just gonna change screens a second. I just need to share mine, if I can find it. There we go. Okay. Does that look all right, Christy?
I don't think it's in full screen.
Sorry. 2 seconds. Okay, is that better?
Yes, perfect.
I can't move my slides. Sorry.
That's okay. Maybe if you click on the screen, it might.
Yeah, I'm going for this. There we go. Right. Okay. Sorry for the techno moments. Right. Okay. I should be good to go now. Thanks, Christy. Right. Good morning, everyone. Afternoon, even. Thank you all for joining this webinar. It's great to see so many people interested in consultancy. So for those of you who don't know me already, I'm Diana and I work part-time as a Welsh Section Support Officer for CIEEM for 2 days a week. And outside of that, I run my own independent freelance consultancy business, trading as Carew Ecology Associates. Officially 1 day a week, but usually more like 2. I also sit on the board of directors for the West Wales Biodiversity Information Centre, and I look after my 1-year-old boy for a few days a week. So I'm going to be wearing my consultant hat today and talk to you about what it means to be a consultant ecologist, rather than my CIEEM hat, that is. So a number of years ago, I was approached by a teen magazine in the States, of all places, and asked to write a piece for their magazine about working as an ecologist. I love writing, but I was a bit unsure about this teen magazine thing because I don't really fit in with being particularly girly, mostly because I spend a lot of time getting muddy and generally being okay with not looking very glamorous when I'm doing site work. But then I delved into this a bit further and realised that what they actually wanted was an article in support of careers in science, technology, engineering and maths, STEM for short. And they wanted me to explain how someone might get into this sort of career and give tips to aspiring ecologists just like you. I figured that if I didn't have to talk about makeup or celebrity gossip, that would be okay. So what advice did I give at that time? It was super broad and aimed at an age group probably slightly younger than you guys, but looking back at it now, I still feel some of the key points are just as relevant to those of you who are on this webinar today. There are so many routes into it, some of which can be super random. You must have a passion for plants and animals. If you're not so good with slimy things like frogs and newts, or things that might bite you like bats, you're going to face extra challenges. You need to have a willingness to work hard and affinity to learn about the things that interest you. Ecology is such a vast subject, it's totally endless. Always follow your nose and do the things that you enjoy. You're in that job for 40 odd hours a week, probably more. Make sure that if you have a passion for birds, you focus on that rather than something you're not quite so excited about. Hard graft volunteering, you can't escape it, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So those were my key points. I'm hoping to expand on the advice and encouragement I gave in this article with my presentation today. You're probably aware that there's many different types of ecologists. You could be working in a local authority as a planning ecologist, or for Natural Resources Wales, or Natural England or SNH, or for an NGO like the Wildlife Trust, or in academia. But what I'm here to talk about specifically today is working as a consultant ecologist. So what does a consultant ecologist do? This is a really interesting question, and it took me a few years to work it out. So, hey, you're going to know about it in the next couple of minutes. Most of the time, consultant ecologists are working on behalf of developers, although some may also do other work on behalf of NGOs, government bodies, and community groups. Some consultancies also get involved with research projects, especially if they have close ties with the local university and/or a research body. So legally, development projects can't just go ahead anywhere. This used to be the case, but it's not true anymore. Planning permission for development is needed from the local authority, required for projects as small as a kitchen extension or a 5-dwelling housing development, right through to single wind turbines, quarry extensions, power stations, road schemes, and other significant infrastructure, the classic example at the moment being HS2. Even where planning permission is not required, such as for forestry works and pipeline repairs and things, projects must still comply with legislation and other permitting requirements. Each project needs to be assessed against legislation and planning policy by the LPA's planning department, and with input from each discipline within their organisation, including ecology. In order to assess the impacts of a proposal on the site, you must know where it is. You must know what's on the site, and you must know you must be able to survey. And in order to survey, you need to understand the ecology of the site. So you can spot plants and animals, either literally by seeing them, so like botany, finding their field signs like their droppings, their hair, their footprint, or by the calls such as bird song or by acoustic analysis of bat calls. A consultant ecologist is contracted by the developer to do this work on their behalf. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what a consultant ecologist does. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about individual tasks that they get up to. So the first type of survey that we often do on a site is called a preliminary ecological appraisal. You guys may have heard of this already. So this includes a completion of a phase 1 habitat survey, a dust study, and assessment of protected and otherwise notable species. Further, more detailed surveys for specific habitats and species may then be required. So taking the dust study results into account and by looking at the habitats present on and around your site to see what might be suitable. If there's no marine habitat, don't worry about cetaceans. Lots of good quality grassland and several ponds. Think about reptiles, amphibians and invertebrates. So the aim is to target your efforts for additional survey. So what species do we look for? There's a huge amount of focus on European protected species, which are covered under what we know as the habitats regulations, which incidentally after Brexit hopefully will be transposed into UK law, so we're not going to lose that. Who knows what happens down the line, but that's another story. So species that are European protected include dormice, like this little fella, and bats. This is a colleague of mine endoscoping a tree, so he's looking up into the hollow to see if he can see any bats. And as well as otters, great crested newts, smooth snake and sand lizard. And we also survey for animals protected by domestic law, such as the Wildlife and Countryside Act, like water voles, this is a water vole here, and some more common reptile species such as lizards, grass snakes and slow worms. This is a slow worm here now, like this little dude. So other types of survey that we might do may include more detailed botanical surveys, such as, may include more detailed botanical surveys and other things like badgers, which are protected under Badger Act for welfare reasons rather than ecology, National Vegetation Classification System, where the potential for interesting botany has been identified, hedgerow surveys, where we think we might have hedgerows that qualify as important, invert surveys, and specific detailed bird surveys, such as for barn owls or winter migratory species. So what do we do with all this data that we've gathered? We need to interpret it and relate it to the project's development proposals through the reporting process, which includes looking at the potential impacts of the development on the site and its ecology and advising our clients accordingly. First, we must assess the value of each ecological feature that is likely to be impacted on. We must also assess the likely impact and advise the client regarding avoidance, mitigation and compensation, often by convincing them to tweak the design of the scheme at an early stage or by putting appropriate mitigation or compensation strategies into place. So this is something that we are known as the mitigation hierarchy, which again you may have already heard of. So in the first stage, we avoid the impact. So for example, where a bat roost has been identified and we're concerned about the risk of killing and injury to bats. So instead of using a swing board to demolish a building, which would be quite fun, but hey, we soft strip the roof by taking the tiles off one by one, usually under a mitigation license, and release any bats we find. Restoration, we replant an area of woodland that's been removed as a result of a new pipeline installation, or we leave it to regenerate naturally. And offsetting, for example, we had to fill in a pond to make way for housing and infrastructure. We can't reinstate the pond where it was, but we can create several new ones elsewhere on the site to offset the loss of the original. So what we're aiming for is no net loss, which is a requirement of planning policy, without which the developer would generally not get planning permission except in very special circumstances. Ideally, we would like to get net gain for biodiversity, but sometimes this is really difficult. We may also need to obtain protected species licenses with respect to development for animals such as bats, great-crested newts and dormice. The consultant ecologist will also do these things, as well as being involved with the practical implementation of work such as supervision of vegetation clearance, trapping, translocation, collectively known as ecological clerk of works or ECAL, and long-term monitoring of project success. Ecology can be expensive to developers, so how do we convince these guys to do something they don't want to do, like build extra ponds or avoid a nice bit of woodland? We get creative. This work involves working closely with the developer, their architect, the local planning ecologist, the landscape consultant, MLW, Natural England if you're in England, and SNH in Scotland, and the Environmental Protection Agency in Northern Ireland. In fact, a huge variety of people. We need to use our powers of persuasion to explain and convince them that what is needed in order to allow the planning department, and including the planning ecologist, to agree and confirm that their proposals comply with all planning policy and legislation. Biodiversity and ecology are often perceived as a problem by the developer, so essentially we need to provide them with a solution. Being an ecological consultant is not just about cuddling fluffy creatures and wandering around in the fields looking at nice trees, although we do get to do some of that stuff. It requires a huge number of different skills in order to complete many different tasks. One day is never the same as the next. It involves time at your desk. This is a picture of my desk in my old house, generally covered with books and bits of dead animal, etc. We also need to write reports, we need to draft emails, we need to phone clients and go to meetings that can last all day. This is a real life meeting, about 4 hours after negotiating. So you can see all the empty cups, the pizza boxes, the client looking quite tired, and the landowner just, wanting to be somewhere else anyway. So that's all part of being a consultant. And sometimes it requires us to do work at times of the day and night when you'd rather be doing something else, like sleeping. So this is a 3 a.m. start to complete a dawn bat survey. This is kind of the bread and butter of ecologists, and if you're starting out in consultancy, this is likely to be something that you end up doing. It may also require you to do things that you're uncomfortable with, such as spending time at heights. This is really, this is not me smiling, this is actually grimace, and that truck in the background is probably, you'd probably just about stick your head over the caterpillar treads. It's absolutely massive, and I'm really high up in the building bricking it, but I did it, hey. I don't really do heights, obviously. And sometimes you meet unexpected and over-friendly occupants of the field that you're trying to survey. So that's fine. If you like horses, I do, but preferably when they're on the other side of the fence. So ecology can be challenging, but it's also extremely rewarding when you help a client with their project, you convince them to do the right thing for ecology, and they are rewarded with planning consent. So my ultimate aim in a report is to get a do it like Di says in her report, planning condition in the consent notice, and then happy days. And as an ecologist, you get to see lots of beautiful places that other people do not see very often. This is your office. This is my colleague Steve. He's wandering around. If you're wondering what he's holding in his right hand, it's a bendy mirror from Halford that would normally be used to inspect your engine of your car. Incredibly handy for checking dormouse tubes. So I just want to talk briefly about moral dilemmas. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are not really keen on development, and I'm not either, really. There are other ways to address this, either politically, so centrally devolved in local politics, working for an NGO like the RSPB, National Trust of Bug Life, or volunteering even, which we all still do, or by changing your own lifestyle to have less impact on the natural world. Regardless of this, unfortunately, development is happening and it will continue to happen. And if development has to go ahead, as a consultant ecologist, you can help ensure that it happens in the best possible way for ecology. It doesn't always work out, but at least you've done as much as you can. So where did I get to where I am today? As I said earlier, there are many routes into a career in ecology and no right or wrong way to do it. I started out by choosing a slightly random assortment of A-levels when I was growing up in Somerset, which I did in English literature, ancient history, general studies, and biology as a bit of an afterthought. I quickly realised how much I love biology and anything to do with the natural world. And unfortunately, I struggled to get into a lot of universities without any other science A-levels, but eventually ended up doing environmental biology at Swansea University in Wales. And after university, I worked as a science technician in a sixth form college in Cardiff. But I quickly got bored and applied to do an MSc in plant diversity at Reading University. Afterwards, I wanted to stay in Reading, but I couldn't find a job, so I ended up volunteering for BCTV even, and the local wildlife trust while working in low-paid admin jobs before taking the plunge a year after graduation and applying for jobs elsewhere. I immediately got some offers and took up a post in a small consultancy practice in Cheshire. So the moral of that is be prepared to move around for the work if you can. This job didn't work out in the long term, but it got me a foot in the door of consultancy. And after much pestering, I got a job as an ecologist at RPS, a large consultancy with strong environmental and planning base. I later went to Jacobs, a huge multidisciplinary consultancy with an engineering heart, following which I took a few years out of the UK and worked in New Zealand in a rather random array of ecology, biodiversity and conservation jobs. So the picture's to the right there now. The top one, I am looking for shellfish in a very muddy estuary to test for contamination. And the bottom picture is me as a park ranger, which was a really cool and awesome job. I came back to the UK in 2012 and I went to work for Baker Consultants, an ecology-only consultancy based in Derbyshire, and I later moved back to Swansea to set up a Wales-based office. In 2006, I applied for the post of Welsh Section Support Officer and got it, and it seemed like the perfect time to start my own consultancy business to keep me busy the other 3 days of the week. The CIEEM job ensures that I have a regular income through the winter when a lot of freelancers find it more challenging to get enough work. So don't reject part-time work in a non-ecology job as an option, as it can be a great way to develop skills during your day off through volunteering or assisting bigger consultancies on an ad hoc basis. So I wanted to talk about what skills are needed to be a good ecological consultant. Now, I gave this talk to Swansea University a few weeks ago, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, do I have to have all these things, like all the ones that you've listed, straight away before I even think about having a job in consultancy? And realised I'd kind of panicked people. So this comes with a health warning. You don't need all this straight away. This is stuff to aim for. You just need to be on the road to get towards getting it. I don't think I've got all of these skills, to be honest, 100% of the time. So it's not something to panic about. It's just something to aim towards. It's also worth looking at CIEEM's competency framework and making a plan of all the things that you want to try and achieve, and to be aware that there's lots of on-the-job training, and it's great if you can look proactive and explain to employers at the start what you want to learn. To say you want to learn everything is probably wouldn't come across as well as if you said, I've got these 3 things that I'm really keen on. So anyway, without further ado, skills that you need to aim to have as a consultant ecologist. Number 1, you need to know your stuff. You need to understand ecology and how it all fits together, and that is where getting a degree in a related subject gives you a huge head start. You don't have to have a degree. There's heaps of other ways into this, but if you are a student or you're thinking about it, or you're thinking you might go back to university, then this definitely does help. You also do need to know a lot about poo. So finding badger dung pits, for instance, like this one in this photograph, is part of having good field skills and the ability to spot telltale signs that animals left behind. So we look for water vole droppings and otter spraints by watercourses, bat poo in attic spaces, and owl splashings in barns. Knowing your stuff also means knowing what different species look like and where they live. So plant and habitat identification skills are also really crucial. And you might need some survey licenses for species like bats, newts and dormice, so these are the European protected species. And things like sound analysis software, particularly in relation to bats and some bird species like nightjar. So a lot of these skills aren't always easy to come across, and more than often not are learned on the job. And they might not be part of your degree course. You might need to think about doing some additional training outside of your university. You also need to have a good understanding of legislation, planning, policy and process, as well as things like survey guidelines and when to apply them to your projects. And you must be able to keep up to date with all the ongoing changes to these, which basically never ends. I just despair. I can't keep up with everything. I try as much as possible, but there is so much out there. It's bonkers, particularly now with Brexit happening, and the fact that the environment stuff is devolved in all the nations of the UK. So there are also a number of more transferable skills that you're likely to need. So fieldwork can involve a lot of walking. I completed a badger survey on a large site in Cornwall a few years ago, going up and down both sides of the hedgerows and climbing gates, etc. And I, for some reason, I had my GPS thingy turned on, and it turned out I'd walked 8 miles before lunchtime. So just to give you an idea of what might be expected. So basic fitness is pretty important. You'll also need a driving license. A lot of sites are remote and away from public transport or too far to cycle or walk. Having said that, I have cycled and walked to sites before, which is good, very eco. But I would say a driving license is pretty critical. I think that not having passed my test when I left university really held me back, and it was my #1 priority for sorting out before I got my first consultancy job. So you need to be able to read a map, find a site and navigate your way around it. Computer skills, including GIS and mapping, very useful, and a given for people nowadays. But also being able to deal with people who don't have these skills. So you might have a landowner who's retired and wants to build, I don't know, a granny annex on the side of their building. They might not do email. You might have to talk to them on the phone, or you might even have to send a letter. Crazy times. So basic communication skills, letters, in person, telephone. Sounds daft, but not everyone that you come across will do email or texting. So being able to write is super important. There's no good in being a brilliant birder but not being able to communicate your results or assessment of a site assemblage to anybody else. And you need to be able to negotiate and liaise with other disciplines like the landscape architect, the archaeologist, the drainage guys, the planning consultants, etc. Work needs to be quoted for and won, so you need to be able to correctly guess how much time tasks will take you and then stick to it as far as you can. There are loads of logistics involved, such as getting survey gear from one place to another, and people, as well as juggling different and changing priorities on different projects and sites. You must be able to communicate with people in real life, on the phone, by email, in meetings, and never stop learning, asking questions and reading stuff. Get out in the field as much as you can with people who are better than you. And there always will be better people than you and worse people. So how do I get these skills? This sounds like an awful lot to learn, and that's true, but you do learn a lot on the job in consultancy, and any decent employer should ensure you have good mentoring when you start to work in areas at the edge of your comfort zone. If you're in your first consultancy job and you're not getting that, start looking around. Don't accept anything less, really. And one of the best bits of advice I was given at the very start of my career was that consultancy is not like university. You don't learn and develop all these new skills in a methodical way. You just have to absorb stuff as it comes along. There are, however, some specific things that you can do to put you ahead of the game. So I've put the slide up now here. It's slightly early, but hey, getting a degree, because qualifications are really useful, give you a good, strong, broad background in ecology, and are usually, but not always, a requirement of a company looking to employ consultant ecologists. And my best advice is to study hard and do as well as you can if you are studying at the moment. Many job descriptions ask you to have experience, but how do you get that without having the job in the first place? The answer is to volunteer. Now, this is an interesting thing to discuss, but I will start by saying this is probably a rite of passage for anybody working in the environmental sector, not just as a consultant ecologist. And just having a good degree is probably not enough. There's heaps of ways you can get involved, volunteering for your local back group with the Wildlife Trust, the National Trust Work Party system. You'll meet lots of people, share ideas, find out about other events and wildlife groups in the area, learn new skills and develop existing ones. And whatever your interest, be it botany, birds or bats, there'll be some local interest group that you can get involved with and learn from, particularly for your identification and general field skills. So a quick word on this stuff. Volunteering at the moment is really difficult because of the current situation. So there are things that are happening online. So a lot of citizen science projects where data's been collected, but it needs sorting out. There's things like with bat calls, there's stuff with species ID stuff. There's heaps of things online. CIEEM's starting to share things like this via their Twitter and LinkedIn pages. So definitely have a look at that, because this is ways that you can volunteer on projects without leaving your house, basically, which is kind of what we're all doing at the moment. And another thing to mention is doing some subcontracting for consultancies that generally need summer workers, often people employed from around about March to September. And at the moment, whilst there are companies that have furloughed some of their staff, there are other companies out there who are trying to employ locally based ecologists so that they don't have to travel and they don't have to provide lots of their core staff to stay overnight in hotels, for example. So maybe a good time actually to send your CV to these companies. Not all companies are going to be doing this, but it's something to bear in mind. And also there are companies out there who will always send out two-man teams. Obviously that's not great at the moment, because if you're not in the same household, then it's not going to work out, but something to bear in mind for the future, perhaps later in the summer, that a lot of employers will take on extra people over the summer. So what else you need to do or could do? Training. CIEEM obviously runs training courses with discounts for student members. And with my consultant hat well and truly on, I should also say that other training providers are available, such as the Wildlife Trust, the National Trust and the Field Studies Council. And you can get more detailed and specific training under your belt through these guys. CIEEM is also doing some work at the moment, again through Twitter and LinkedIn, trying to promote a lot of online training and particularly identification stuff, because obviously people can't go out in the field and a lot of field-based courses have been postponed or cancelled. So definitely keep an eye on social media, and that should really point you in the direction of some things that you can do, again, whilst you're stuck at home. Oops, I've missed a slide. There we go. Training. This is a training course on bats. We're looking at using nets to catch them, some ID stuff, and at the top we're putting up a harp trap to catch bats. So just a few examples. What else can you do? Read stuff. This is a good time to read. You've got loads of time on your hands, maybe. Check out In Practice, CIEEM's own magazine 4 times a year. Read the website of conservation organisations, charities like BugLife and the Graston Trust. Read around your subject, not just the list you're given in lectures. Keep up to date with environment and ecology in the news, and there's loads happening with Brexit and with Wales-specific legislation if you're this side of the bridge and interested. What else? Networking. Network like mad. It's not what you know, but who you know. That is just so true. It's really important. So icebreaker questions. I remember spending time at conferences and just standing around like a complete dork, thinking everybody knew each other and no one wanted to talk to me and I didn't have anything to say, and it was very embarrassing. But now I've kind of got a stock list of icebreaker questions. Hey, so you can just comment on the food, the weather, the previous talk, ask how far another delegate has travelled, ask who they work for, etc. There's tons of stuff you can try. Ecologists are generally a pretty friendly bunch. And you can also get to drink a lot of tea and eat a lot of cake, these things. So again, at the moment, COVID-19 is happening. Face-to-face networking is really tricky, but stuff like Twitter, LinkedIn, and the Facebook groups, there's a British Ecologist Facebook group. There's also Facebook groups for lots of the other organisations. So if you're into reptiles, the ARG UK guys have their own Facebook page, or the Wildlife Trusts. There's a British Bats one as well. So have a dig around on Facebook. What else can you do? So professional membership. So with CIEEM, Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, the higher grade of membership you achieve, the more skills and experience you have to demonstrate, ultimately aiming for chartership as an ecologist or an environmentalist, or both if you're greedy. My personal view is that being chartered puts us on a par with other disciplines that have been around for much longer than us, such as engineers and architects, and in time I hope that this will result in a higher profile for ecologists and command a certain amount of respect for us as professionals. All ecologists would like to be taken seriously and not just thought of as a thorn in the side of a project. So if you've got some time on your hands at the moment, this is a great time to do to apply for membership if you're not already a member, or if you are, to upgrade your membership to a higher level. So say hello to people, wave, jump up and down, shout, make a lot of noise, just make sure people know you're there. Send your CV to consultancies and say hello. Good times early in the year, so January to March, when consultancies might be looking for assistance on short-term contracts before the summer silly season kicks off. I've kind of mentioned this already. But also June and July, when consultancies who didn't hire enough people early in the year suddenly panic when they win several massive contracts at once and need a helping hand. But if you don't hit back for them, follow up with an email a few weeks later and a few months later. And sometimes it's just about being in the right place at the right time. Get out there. Don't wait to be told how to do something. Get out there and work it out for yourself. Some of the best ecologists and naturalists are completely self-taught. A good old botanising walk and a fossick in the woods in the company of binoculars, a hand lens and ID books can be a great way to start developing your ID skills. Obviously, at this current time, this is more tricky, but it's something to think of for future months. At the moment, if you're walking out to your local park for your exercise, or in footpaths close to your house, if you're lucky enough to have a garden, spend some time in your garden and do some stuff there. And the main thing with all of this, I suppose, is keep going. Perseverance and tenacity in terms of getting your foot in the door at the start of your career are key. Don't lose focus. Keep going, and good luck. And if anyone has any questions, now is a good time to ask me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Diana. Yes, we will do a Q&A session now, and we've already got a couple of questions that have come in. So we have a question from Frank. Do you have any thoughts on whether or not it is useful to have a CSC, Construction Skills Certificate Scheme card?
Yes, it is useful, definitely. Lots of consultancies will ask you to have this. And for those of you not aware of it, it's, gosh, I can't even remember what the acronym means now, but basically it's a card to say that you've done some health and safety training in relation to construction sites. And there are various levels of card that you need to have. Personally, I don't have one. I have done historically. At the moment, a lot of my jobs are quite small and they don't involve being on massive construction sites. But if you decided to work for a consultancy that was doing a lot of infrastructure projects or big housing developments, that kind of thing, then you would need to have that probably on most of those sites. Some developers don't require it, but it's kind of becoming a lot more common. So it's definitely something to have on your radar.
Thank you, Diana. Another question here. What are the pros and cons between working for smaller independent consultancies and large engineering companies as an ecologist?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Well, there's millions, I suppose, and I've worked for all of them. So I've worked for two quite small ecology consultancies and 2 big ones. I suppose for the big ones, they tend to have very good graduate training programs or early career ecologist programs. You're also likely to be in a big team of people, and quite often these companies will only send people out as 2-man teams. So the advantage of that is that you've always got somebody with you, which is really nice, especially at the start of your career. I suppose they also have more structure in terms of things like reviews and annual reviews, and looking at training. You might have a bigger training budget. I suspect you generally get paid more if you're working for a bigger consultancy. If you're working for a smaller consultancy, it's quite different atmosphere, but you still end up on big projects and small projects. You often have to do everything yourself. So you might take the initial call from a client saying they need a VAT survey. You might write the fee quote. You might then go and do the survey. You might write the license, and you might do all the mitigation works and probably send the invoice at the end. Whereas in a larger company, you might find that there are admin people who do that stuff, or people higher up in the company that run all the budgetary stuff. What else for the smaller consultancies? I think it's very hands-on, and you just get everyone just mucks in together. I guess sometimes it can feel like you're more of a team, which is really nice. And also, with my freelance hat on, it's very nice to be able to make your own decisions about stuff rather than what your employer says. So if they just decide to do something you don't agree with, then it can be a bit awkward because you then have to deliver that and do what your boss tells you, basically. Probably I just don't want to have a boss. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, so that's very liberating in some ways, but also it can be lonely. So it's good to make sure that you have other freelancers knocking around. You tend to find, particularly for me in Wales, there are a lot of freelancers, and we're all in touch with each other, and we're all quite friendly, and we share work around when we're busy, or we get each other to help out each other on projects. So it's not so lonely. But yeah, I think that's probably the key things.
Fab, thank you. Another question here from Gemma. Do you feel you have to deal with confrontation a lot in your role? For example, if delivering bad news to a developer?
Yes, occasionally. I think if you can make sure that your projects you're involved with your project team and you have a good relationship with them from very early on, that can really help, and to tell people up front what might happen. So often I've got projects, I do quite a lot of back work. It's not the only stuff I do, but this seems to be bread and butter around here. Often the client will contact me and say the council wants me to do a bat survey, so I immediately say stuff like, well, that I can come and do your initial survey, but I suspect you'll need some emergent surveys and you'll have to wait till May. And I tell them that straight away, so they kind of know. They say it's on the radar. But it's really important to have a good relationship with people. And also, I suppose when you get to this point, I do definitely pick my clients. So if I think someone's going to be really difficult, or they are difficult and they're rude to me or demeaning or whatever, I can just walk away, because life's a bit too short, really. In terms of confrontation on sites and stuff, I was in the middle of a pond up near York one morning very early with a colleague, and the guy wandered by with a gun, and we were like, but it turned out it wasn't a confrontation. Sometimes you get accosted by people on site. Are you working for the council? Oh, my bins haven't been collected, that kind of thing. But generally, I think people are pretty cool. Going back to bad news, I think it's best to just be honest with people, and just say stuff. You know, you can't really avoid saying it. If you don't tell them, then it's worse down the line. So it's best just to be upfront and honest.
Thank you, Di. Another one here from Rosalind. How long did it take you to qualify for protected species licenses?
That is a very good question. I think my first license I got was the Newt license, and I was probably working for like 4 or 5 years before I had that. But that was partly largely because my the people I worked for at the time weren't massively supportive of getting me trained up, and I think perhaps also I probably wasn't as proactive as I could have been. So it took a while, but I think you could, if you did a load of volunteering with local groups, you went out with people who were doing stuff already. I think a newt license is quite easy to get relatively, as long as you've got hours logged. The dormouse one took a lot longer. Well, not even, I don't know if it even took longer, but I spent 2 seasons surveying for dormice as a volunteer for one of the NBMP sites in Wiltshire, actually Savernake Forest. Before I got mine, I did go to conferences and some training and stuff as well. And the bat one did take a while. I initially got my disturbance level license in England, and then I upgraded to class 2. I don't quite know what it's called now, level 2 or whatever. And then when I was in Wales, I just managed to rubber stamp that one. But I've been working with bats probably since sort of 2005, and I probably got my full license well, actually quite a long time later, but that was partly because I was overseas, and yeah, I just took ages to get it. I think it is easier to get it a bit quicker than that if you do some training and join the right groups, etc. But yeah, it's not something that happens overnight.
Thank you. Another question from Vivian. She says, thank you for the information. Are there tools such as iNaturalist you would recommend for improving ID skills? Also, any specific experience that will be useful to gain as a student?
Yes, I think the ID apps and things are really good. There's absolutely tons of them out there. I think probably the best thing is to just have a dig around and play with some of them and see which ones suit. And also people talk about them heaps online, Twitter and all the rest of it, and you can get an idea of which ones are going to be more useful to you. I've forgotten the other question, Christy, sorry. There was a second question. Can you remind me?
Okay. Yeah. Also, any specific experience that would be useful to gain as a student?
Oh, yes. Okay. So, yes, I guess it's things that aren't covered in your degree course. So thinking about all the skills and stuff that I was talking about earlier, which ones are missing from just doing your degree. So those are the ones that you'd want to cover outside of your course. And then it just comes down to personal choice. So if you're really into birds, then you might want to consider doing a lot of bird related stuff, and you might want to think about getting a barn owl license, for example, and working out what you need to do that. If you don't really care about birds, but you want to do loads of plant stuff, you're more of a botanist, then getting out there and going out there with the BSBI groups, the local groups, and doing some plant identification yourself. At the moment, obviously it's difficult, but if you're lucky enough to have a garden or you have access to some sort of green space, it's a really good place to start. So it really depends on what you're interested in. Ecology is so vast and it can seem really overwhelming. So if there's 2 or 3 things that you feel drawn to, I would head in that direction, because there's just absolutely no way that you're going to ever know everything. Pick the things that you're interested in and go down that route.
Thank you. Question here from Lisa. Would staff furloughed from NGOs be useful for local ecology firms looking to brush up on survey skills and have transferable skills?
Sorry, Christy, I missed the first part of that question. Would you mind repeating it, please?
Yeah, sure. So would staff furloughed from NGOs be useful for local ecology firms looking to brush up on survey skills and have transferable skills?
Yes, definitely. I guess just to be conscious that obviously there's loads of issues at the moment with people having jobs and being furloughed, and some consultancies have furloughed their staff as well. So obviously if work comes in that they're able to do, they're going to prioritise their own staff first. Having said that, there are other consultancies out there who are trying to avoid travel to sites and overnight stays and things like that, and they are hiring people that are local to their sites. to help them out with the work. So it's definitely worth giving them a shout, and kind of, I guess, sort of setting yourself up as a subby, or going out as a volunteer, or as a paid like a temporary member of staff or something like that. Because yeah, I'm aware that people have been furloughed from NGOs. It's really sad, but yeah, obviously be aware that companies are going to look after their own staff first, but I think there are opportunities out there.
Thank you. Question from Megan: is a master's degree required or useful?
I don't think any degree is really required always. It's useful, but I suppose the way things are going, particularly with CIEEM, we talk about people being competent rather than having a qualification. A lot of consultancies will ask for a degree level qualification. I think probably most of them would do, to be honest, but not necessarily. I mean, if you're somebody who's been out there doing stuff for 20 odd years as a ranger or whatever, and you really know your species in terms of surveys, but you don't happen to have a degree, then I think you'd still be able to get work. Whether a master's is useful or needed, some places may ask for it. I haven't really seen that, but sometimes if people have done a different kind of first degree, they might want to, so they might have done something in the arts or whatever, they may want to go back and do a master's that's in something that's related to biological sciences or ecology. So in that respect, that might be useful. I did do my master's because at the time, I think there were, a couple of things. One was that everyone suddenly seemed to be getting degrees, and I wanted to do a bit more than that too. I was really bored. And 3, I really liked botany, so I wanted to pursue that, and my master's was much more specific. So if you've got a topic that you're really into and you can do a master's in it, it makes sense, because degree level stuff, as an undergraduate degree, tend to be a little bit more broad. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but some things to think about anyway.
That's great, thank you. Question here from Sam. You mentioned sound analysis and GIS. What is the most common software that you have used for these?
Okay, so the sound analysis stuff for me, it's been bats, but I'm aware there's a lot of stuff going on with birds at the moment and other animals. And if you decided to work abroad, a lot of places use them for things like frogs and insects and all sorts of stuff. So there are various systems out there. To be honest, the last 10 years or so, it's gone completely bonkers. A couple of them that are probably the most common. So the ANABAT system is a zero crossing based system. It also has full spectrum stuff now, and the wildlife acoustic stuff is full spectrum, and it has been for a long time. So those ones would be quite useful. There are others as well, so I can't think of any off the top of my head, but probably look at wildlife acoustics and the ANABAT stuff as a starting point.
Thank you very much. Luke asks, what would you say the biggest challenge is when setting up your own freelance consultancy?
Oh dear, biggest challenge. I think having some capital helps. So if you are thinking about it, then definitely have a little stash of dosh, mostly to buy yourself a decent laptop and the kit that you need to start up. It doesn't have to be 20 grand, it can be a few grand, which is pretty much what I used to start up. So I bought myself a laptop and some basic bat survey equipment, stuff like Newt torch and all the rest of it. So that can be a challenge if you don't have financial backing. If you were going to go freelance entirely, that's quite, I think the biggest challenge is to get over the scariness of it, because you've got no other income, and there's a lot of pressure on you to get jobs and get them invoiced and get people to pay you, basically. So the cash flow thing is probably something to bear in mind. Again, going back to having a bit of money in the bank, I would suggest that's a good starting point. And also in terms of challenge, I suppose pick your time of year when you decide to do it. So early in the year is a good time because you can start building a client base over the summer when it's busy, and doing some startup stuff during the winter when it's quiet. But yeah, challenges. I never really, people always ask me, how did I get work? And basically it just kind of happened. I didn't really do a lot of marketing. I think that's a big worry for a lot of people. But as long as you let enough people know that you're doing it, then I think you'll be fine.
Thank you. What is the average salary for a senior ecological consultant?
Very good question. I have got no idea, to be honest. I would suspect above 30k, somewhere between 30 and 40k. It may be slightly lower if you're working in a smaller consultancy, but I would be expected around that sort of number. That's a pretty broad guess though, so I don't ask all my colleagues how much they earn. Well, not anymore anyway. But yeah, that sort of number, I'd say low mid 30s or so, probably a bit more if you're from a bigger consultancy.
Great, thank you. Rachel asks, to work freelance now or in the future, do you have advice on a minimum level of experience to have to be competent, or do you have any advice in finding mentoring external to your organisation if need be?
Yeah, minimum experience. I think there are companies out there who will employ you with fairly minimal experience. So there are a lot of jobs that need doing that are not particularly technical, which is not to sound demeaning or anything, but so fairly basic tasks, the kind of thing that you'd end up doing anyway if you joined a big consultancy. So stuff like doing a reptile translocation or help a newt translocation, and stuff like just basically being a second person on newt surveys, bat surveys, etc. And I think you're pretty much in those circumstances, as long as you've got some nous and a bit of experience, then you learn a lot on the job. So you basically then be a subcontractor to an existing company. So rather than having direct relationship with your client and getting your own clients and your own jobs in, you just be a subby. That sounds terrible, but you'd be a subcontractor to another company. So that would be quite a good way to get into things if you're a bit less experienced. And again, sorry, Christy, I've forgotten the second bit of the question.
No worries. Do you have any advice in finding mentoring external to your organisation if need be?
Yes, I think there are several things that you can do there. So if you're already working, I'm not sure whether you're obviously working for someone already or whether you're sort of implying you want to jump ship, or whether you just mean generally outside of your company. CIEEM has a mentoring platform which is quite new and really good, and lots of people are doing stuff through that. In terms of happening organically, if you're getting out there and networking, etc., and you know people in your company or perhaps through a local group that you're involved in, you could approach people informally and ask them if they would mentor you, or you could just never say anything, just continue to pick their brains all the time and ask them advice without ever formalizing it. So I think there's different levels of mentoring in terms of formality. But yeah, definitely just talk to people who are more experienced than you, that you perhaps meet outside of your organisation, and see what they say. And there's heaps of opportunities to just get peer-to-peer support through things like the Facebook groups and LinkedIn and Twitter, which can really help.
Thank you very much. Another question from Sam. Along with a standard driving licence, would it be beneficial to have trailer and larger vehicle licences?
Possibly, probably not for consultancy. I don't think I've ever had to worry about that myself, and I don't really know people who have. If you were doing you're very specifically doing ecological clerk of work stuff, there might be a requirement for it, but I probably wouldn't say that that was a really key thing as a consultant. If you were working as a park ranger, or you're much more practical out in the field, you're working for NRW or whatever, you might want to think about it. But or maybe probably what's more useful, actually thinking about it, is to do four-wheel drive training rather than worrying about trailers and stuff. But yeah, I don't think that would, I've never come across that really in consultancy.
Thank you. Question here, what tips do you have for managing your workload during bat survey season?
That's classic. So in terms of working in a company, your employer should really be making sure that you're not doing too many hours at crazy times of the day and night, and that you've got time to have rest. I've probably been historically been part of companies that are expecting quite a lot in that respect, which nowadays I think would be frowned on, but 15 years ago people just did it. And it's not very healthy. So things like late night driving and stuff after a bat survey, or having got up at 3 o'clock in the morning and then driving 2.5 hours home, is pretty horrific. So in terms of managing it, obviously make sure that you're employed by someone who has a decent policy for overtime. And some companies will expect you to work more in the summer, but they'll reduce your hours in the winter. Some people have like annualized contracts where they're paid every month, but they do the bulk of the hours between sort of February, March time and September, October. So it means you get 3 or 4 months off over the winter, which is quite interesting. Other people just want to make you take your toil back as soon as possible. So if you've been out late, then it's great if you just come in late the next day to the office, if you're back in the office. In terms of freelancing, it is very tricky because there's only you to do the work and whoever you're employing as your helpers. So the key to that is saying no to clients sometimes, which is easier said than done. So yeah, just be really conscious about how much time things take, and for example limiting your night work to like 2 surveys or a week if you're doing office surveys as well, office work as well. If you're just employed to do survey work, then I think it's fine to be doing sort of 4 or 5 in a row, but that is on the proviso that you're not then going to the office to do reporting and talking to clients, because probably you wouldn't make much sense if you haven't had much sleep.
Thank you, Diana. Just to say, we are basically at 2 o'clock and we have 8 questions left. Would you like to carry on or answer these at a later time?
Yeah, no, crack on. Yeah. I'm on a roll now, I think.
Okay, no problem. So another question here, how can you avoid to get stuck in volunteering? How can I move to the next step of getting a job?
Yeah, good question. I think it's really tough. Firstly, I think don't be discouraged because it can feel like you're constantly sending CVs and letters to people. If you're not doing that, then that's something to do, definitely. Yeah, I agree. It's not great to get stuck in volunteering. And it can go on for quite a long time. One of the things I think that was difficult for me was that I did get stuck in volunteering for a while, and I couldn't find a proper job, as it were. And the thing that changed it for me was to be willing to move around and just go where the job is. That can really help. Keeping an eye on jobs pages, so Countryside Jobs Service, CIEEM have a vacancies page. There are various other things on the internet. Environment Jobs, I think, was the one that sprung to mind. I think just keep at it. Keep sending your CV. Keep sending your letters. Don't be frightened to cold call people. Don't just wait for a application to come up in the on the jobs pages. Find out who these companies are run by and who you need to send a letter to, and just cold call them. I think 2 or 3 of my jobs happened because I did that, and I mean they may have ended up advertising in the end anyway, but they definitely weren't advertised when I sent my CV. And so, yeah, I think keep going, don't get too discouraged.
Thank you very much. A question here from Bridget. Do you need any project management experience? And if so, what would you recommend?
I think generally you end up being, well, hopefully you're supported by your employer when you start taking on project management stuff. So initially, in an ideal world, bear in mind that that probably didn't happen for me, but you would be shadowing someone who's project managing so they can explain how things go. And then you may be given a project or two to manage yourself with someone looking over your shoulder and just checking you're happy and supporting you. And then eventually you will be at a point where you can manage bigger projects, multiple projects at the same time. Again, you'd expect your employers to be supportive of you to do this. In terms of training, I don't really know anyone, to be honest. I'm pretty sure that most of my people I know who are in consultancy never had any project management training. They just kind of worked it out, and they were supported and given tips by people who've done it before. So yeah, it's something to be conscious of. But there are other things, I suppose, that you can use to demonstrate that you can manage a project that might be completely unrelated. So when I was at university, I was a big part of the Whitewater Kayaking Club, and we ran massive trips with 60 or 70 people, and we were sorting out logistics with buses and trailers and boats and accommodation and all the rest of it. And I played quite a big part of that. So I kind of had some experience of logistics and managing people to do something. So whilst it wasn't in ecology, it was still relevant. So have a think about whether you've got that kind of experience that's not ecology related, and see if you could relate it to your job application.
Great, thank you. Another question here. What suggestion would you give to a foreigner with an MSc degree in the UK but has a lack of work experience who would want to work in the UK as an environmental consultant?
Yeah, good question. I think it's really tough. But again, I think the opportunities are there. If you've got qualifications, try and get as much experience as you can. Try and get some volunteering work, try and get some paid work if you can. I guess it depends on your visa situation, whether you can do that, but also just trying to get out with people, maybe even shadowing them so you're not paid and you're not really a volunteer, you're just there if you have got visa issues. And I think just persevering, which is really hard because being rejected from things all the time is really demoralizing. But if you really want it and you're really keen, you just need to keep pushing at those doors, and one day one of them will open for you. But if you give up too soon, then you might struggle. So I think persevere and keep sending those letters and CVs off, and try and get as much experience as you can in other ways.
Thank you. Question here from Catherine. Is it possible to specialise in just one area, for example, in raptors or bats, or is it best to gain wider experience?
Yeah, good question. I think it depends on what you want, really. If you really want to have a broad background, or you're just interested in lots of things, then go down that route, because you can always specialise later. But if you already know that you're well into raptors or bats or whatever, then there is definitely scope for being a specialist in those areas in consultancy. I suspect that unless you're already absolutely brilliant at bats and raptors, you're not going to get a job as the raptor ecologist for AECOM or whatever. You're going to go in as a general ecologist, so you probably want to have a broad understanding of everything-ish as much as you can, obviously, because it's just vast to begin with, and then make sure that you tell your employers that you're really interested in your bats or whatever, and make sure that your training and your projects that you take on are relevant to that. But yes, definitely there are specialists out there, specialist companies, in fact, who tend to do a lot more bat work. They'll probably do other stuff as well, but there are definitely people out there, and particularly smaller outfits who might have a really strong birding specialism or whatever. So yeah, I think that would be fine.
Fab, thank you. Question, how do you find the time to run your own consultancy considering the admin required? And did you need a background in business management to become a freelancer?
Yeah, good question. Admin, I try and minimize it absolutely to the minimum. So like, well, I don't have a timesheet system for a start, which used to drive me nuts as a employee. I have a very basic invoice template that I made in Excel. I just minimize the admin really. I'm not sure. I pay people electronically, so I don't have to faff about with checks and all the rest of it, or do anything retro like that. So I try and keep everything as electronic as possible. In terms of business management, no, just I guess because I'd done a lot of project management, I kind of understood the way that you budget for a project. You work out the number of hours you think it's going to take, you have an hourly rate and you multiply it up, etc. And then trying to stick to budget and make sure you're invoicing at the end. I did my first tax return myself and then got really freaked out that I might have done it wrong. So the next time around, I had an accountant look over my tax return for me, which didn't cost me a huge amount of money and was a massive weight off my mind. And actually, I got some money back because I'd overpaid my tax, which is really, this never happens. So I didn't need anything really in business management, just really budgeting and being able to know how much money things are when you buy new kit and stuff and not overgo your budget for each project. So yeah, I think you don't have to do that. Just be able to add up and subtract, I suppose.
That's great, thank you. Question here, are environmental impact assessments a large part of the job?
Yes, depending on which company you work for. So when you're saying environmental impact assessments, I'm assuming you mean sort of big projects that ecology forms part of an EIA. Those tend to be the bigger consultancies, but smaller ones do still have to do EIA work. In terms of ecological impact assessment stuff, that is basically the bread and butter. That's essentially what you're doing when you're looking at the impacts of a planning application. You're doing a kind of mini EIA, and that is basically on a daily basis because you're always going to be looking what's there, what's the impacts, how can I mitigate, what do I advise my client. So yeah, that is pretty much what we do.
Fab, thank you. Rachel asks, are there any books you have read that you would particularly recommend? Can be ID books or other books.
Oh, there's so many books. Yeah, so there are, so as an ecological consultant, a lot of what you're doing is survey work, and a lot of the surveys that we do have guidelines for conducting these surveys. So if this is the sort of route you want to take, then those are the books that you need to read. So there's a waterfall mitigation handbook, there's the dormouse conservation handbook, which is hoping you updated, the bat survey guidelines. There's tons. A good resource is probably the CIEEM website, where they've got some guidance about survey methods. So they would be good places to start. Yeah, I can't really think of any specific books other than if you're more into botany, then looking at Francis Rose and Stace and stuff like that is the kind of the Bible really of vegetation survey. There's a phase 1 habitat methodology as well. There's tons. I mean, there's heaps. I can't really pick up anything in particular apart from those sorts of things. I'd say just check all the survey guidelines for each species.
Fab, thank you. So 2 more questions left. What are the best resources to learn about relevant legislation?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I'm not really sure where you'd go for kind of basic summary. There are some websites out there, probably doing a Google search, which sounds really lame, is a good start. there are some that kind of summarize the legislation stuff. And there's obviously all the planning, there's the planning portal website that will explain a lot of the planning related stuff, but it is pretty dry. It's not that exciting. And well, if you want something super dry, then there is a website with all our legislation on it, which is mad, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend you reading all that. Probably somewhere like the JNCC website is a good place to start. And then if you're in England, then Natural England and in Wales, the NRW website can really help. But yeah, I'm not really sure where I'd go as a sort of basic starting point. I'd have to have a think about that one.
Fab, thank you. And we're down to our final question. How good does your botany ID skills need to be when looking for your first seasonal or full-time position?
Yeah, it depends what you're doing. If you're being asked to do phase ones and or botany related stuff, then obviously you need to have pretty good skills already. If you're just going out doing protected species surveys, then it's not really something that would necessarily be required, but you kind of hope that you'd get some of those skills as you go along. So I wouldn't panic too much, but it would be useful if you can identify basic habitat types. The phase 1 habitat survey handbook probably is a good place to start in terms of looking at key species for each habitat, so you can start getting an idea of what you're looking at. So it's pretty basic. It's, you know, is this coniferous woodland? Is it broadleaf woodland? Is it mixed woodland? You know, being able to do that as a starting point is useful. So the habitat identification is pretty important. In terms of actual botany, I mean, botany skills are just really not as common as they were, and it's something that employers do complain about. But as if you're very much starting out, then I wouldn't worry about it too much to begin with, but have it on your radar and try and improve it over the coming years and months.
Fab, thank you, Diana. So that concludes the Q&A. Thank you so much for delivering such an informative webinar, and thank you to everybody for listening and for sending in your questions. We've had a few comments about whether we'll share the presentation, and I have recorded it, and if it's okay with you, Diana, we can send the recording around to everybody.
Possibly. I might have to tweak some of the slides because they're probably not for public consumption.
Okay, we'll look to see what we can with that, and we'll also send around the competencies that you can record this webinar against. Yeah, so I think that's everything. Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope that you join us for future CIEEM webinars.